Thanks for checking out this video, and if you'd like to find out lots more information about the other courses and workshops I offer, both in person and online, simply visit my website at peterkeegan.com. To get our dark tones in, I'm going to go straight into using my big brush. So I've got a number 12 here, and again, this is a filbert brush, and I'm going to start blocking in these dark tones. So looking at the palette, I'm going to avoid using water now because I want the painting to start sort of building up a bit of thickness. So if you do have a bit of moisture on your palette, you could just take a rag and just take off that the moisture. As you can see, I don't worry about the other colours on the palette polluting each other. I think it gives the picture a nice bit of harmony when they're all sort of working together. So let's just take a little bit of French ultramarine blue and a bit of Viridian green and bring in a hint of the raw umber now. So I'm going to start off looking at those dark tones. So looking at my picture, I'm sort of asking myself, where are my darkest darks? Where are my sort of blacks, if you like? And those are the things I'm going to be focusing on first. So holding my brush right at the very end to sort of keep it nice and loose, I'm going to start putting in some of these big sort of bold brush strokes. Now what you should start to notice is how important that base colour is. And already, even though I'm laying on these dark marks, I can start to see some of this yellow come through, and that's what makes a picture really, really interesting. If you were to doing this on white, it will just look a little bit flat. You won't sort of get that lovely warmth and energy coming through these brush strokes. So it's just really important just to note that essential element of priming and putting a base colour under your on your canvas, under your picture. So I'm putting these dark marks on first. Now, if like me, you find identifying tones, those tonal values, the difference between light and dark, if you find that quite difficult, one of the easiest things that you can do to help that process is to squint, is to sort of half close your eyes and look at the world in just blur and fuzz. And if you have glasses, take your glasses off, stand back, half close your eyes, and instead of painting things in detail, you'll just start noticing just these shapes and these lovely masses and forms. And this is what we're doing. We call this painting process blocking in, if you like. Just identifying these masses of dark patches and scribbling them on very, very loosely and very freely. If you notice, I'm not using much water or hardly any water at all. I'm allowing the paint to do all the work. Even with very, very thin consistency acrylics, you should still rely on the thickness of the paint and not rely on thinning it too much. Sometimes people, they get a little bit water happy with acrylic paintings, and they end up thinning it so much that you could be forgiven for thinking it's a watercolour. So try and avoid using the water for painting, but instead just using it for cleaning your brushes. So I've put in those lovely dark marks there. So I want to look at this focal point. Now this is the really important part of the whole picture because it's leading your eye. So I'm mixing a very, very dark tone. Now, if you want to mix something as close as black, but you don't have black on your palette, and I'd really discourage you using black. Black can often pollute and really kind of make a lot of the colours get grey and quite dead. So instead of adding black, you can mix your own range of really beautiful dark colours. So starting off with my raw umber, which is the darkest tone on my palette, I've started introducing just a hint of the blue, a hint of the Viridian green, and even a little bit of this magenta over here. And by mixing these together, you get a really interesting range of darks. It's not just black. You can get blacks that are slightly more green, or slightly more blue, more brown, more purple, and so on. And it will make the picture a lot more interesting, a lot more vibrant than just relying on a flat black base and straight out of the tube colour. So using this dark, this is going to be this very, very dark tree trunk, which is just behind the archway, just like that. And again, this is all using this big number 12 brush, so it's forcing me to not focus and paint the detail. I'm just going to splash a little bit more of that colour around, keeping the picture very much in harmony in relation to each other. Let's put that a little straighter there. And then let's look at the brick wall. Now, the brick wall has a sort of a bluey purpley quality to it. So looking at that, I'm going to move away from this dark patch. Let's bring a little bit of that magenta. Now I'm going to steal just a little bit of this dark mixture and take it into the magenta just to keep it consistent. And let's just bring a bit of the ultramarine And we're getting a really interesting deep purple colour. A little bit more blue, and I think I'm a little white just to lighten it up a fraction. And I think we're about sort of here, so let's try and see how that looks on the picture. Let's just bring a bit of white just to chalk it up just a little bit more. There you go, so it's almost like a very dirty mauve colour. Now I want that purple just to sort of melt away and disappear into the dark foliage back here, into that shrubbery. Bit darker there on the right hand side, just to sort of build it up. Try and avoid having it very, very flat. I know your brain may say it is a brick wall, so it must look very even, but having just a variety of subtle marks and subtle colours will give the impression of textured brickwork. So try not to keep it one flat plane and one flat colour. Now while I've got this colour on my brush and on the palette, I'm going to try and bounce this colour just around the picture. Now I want all my pictures to sort of have this sort of connection and a rhythm, if you like, that all the colours are working together and talking to each other. So I'm splashing this sort of dirty kind of purple, if you like, around the picture. And you might think, well, I can't see this purple in, but through standing back and half closing your eyes, you start to see areas of the picture that sort of almost half represent this sort of purple, this sort of interesting colour. And what this is doing is it's giving the painting connection. If I just allowed this purple just to remain in that focal point, it would just seem a little bit alien because it doesn't feature anywhere else in the picture. So whenever I've got a colour on my brush, I'll try very hard to sort of push it elsewhere in the picture just to really bring it all together. Okay, so now I've put those purples in, I'm going to start moving up that scale of tone. I've probably put in all my darkest tonal values, so I'm going to go up that scale now and sort of get to my mid-tone range. Now I've got lots of different mid-tones to work with, and they all pretty much are in that green territory, from very, very dark, inky, purpley black greens, right the way up to very, very bright acidic greens. So I'm looking at that kind of range, but particular focus on those mid-tone values. So let's get straight. I'm using the same brush. I haven't really cleaned it, so it's still got a little bit of the purple into it. Let's go into my sap green here. Let's bring a little bit of cadmium yellow into it. And I'm going to just take a hint of that purple mixture in, again, just to give the painting consistency. Okay, so we've got this green. So where am I sort of my next darkest? Let's sort of look up into this canopy up here. I'll start putting some of these greens in. I'm going to go a little lighter now. Just a hint of lemon yellow. So using a Viridian green and blue, it's going to give me a really deep, very kind of intense green. And I want to try and get this sense of the shadow going across. I need to get that a little bit lighter, so a little bit of the lemon yellow, which is quite a light acidic yellow, which will help with the way this colour is perceived. And start dragging the brush across to describe these shadows. So let's get a little bit lighter now with our greens. So we're going to get slightly yellower now, not quite as much sort of blue in the territory of the greens, not quite as cool. We're going to get warmer and warmer with the addition of the yellows, particularly the cadmium yellow that we've got coming on here now. So I want to talk a little bit about my brushstrokes and the way that I'm applying them. And you'll notice I'm sort of starting to work them in a particular direction. Now, I'm not sort of doing this in a stylistic way, but what I'm trying to do is I'm allowing the brushstrokes just to give an impression, to give a description, if you like, of the foliage. So by moving the brush sort of up and down in this sort of little zigzag way, that's starting to give the illusion, if you like, that this is describing plant life growing upwards. And in other areas, for example, like the shadows, I was of course moving the brushstroke across from left to right to describe those shadows going up. So I'm using the sort of character and the description of the image, of the scene, and the way that it's made up, and the direction of all this life in the picture to just help me and lead and guide me to the way that I could describe them using the brush, whether it be going up and down or left and right. If you allow the brush to make the same mark across the picture, you'll get something that the eye will get very, very bored with after a while. So try and offer a variety of marks, whether they be very, very large and flat marks, to later on when I put some detail in, some smaller marks. So that variety will hopefully engage people to look at your picture just that little bit longer, because there's a lovely range of mark making to enjoy looking at. So I'm starting to get progressively lighter now with my tones. So I'm starting to add a little bit more white and a lighter yellow and a little bit of this very bright leaf green. So we're not on, highlights yet, but we're just sort of on that top scale of the vibrant mid-tones. The very greeny greens is what I'm trying to put across right now. Just going to do a sort of a transitional colour that's from these shadows on the grass that'll end up on a very, very pale grass leading you up to the eye. So just sort of hugging these dark shadows with this mid-tone, and that'll give a sort of a good transitional tone into the highlights. Let's put the lovely highlight. So I'm just going to put this green in the archway. Now, before I finish with these mid-tones and move on towards my highlights, I need to start bringing in some of the colour, some of the additional colour, because at the moment it's very biased towards the greens and these hints of these dark purples. I need to bring some of the pinks and blues into the picture. So I'm going to jump down to a smaller filbert. So this is a number 8. And let's start looking at some of my warmer pinks, and it'll just start breaking up the green of the picture. So I'm going to start off with the lovely sort of pinky colour back here. I mean, there's not a lot of paint on my brush, and I'm moving it around in a sort of a dry brush stroke. So we call that a scumbled brush stroke, where you can still see some of the colour, the green underneath, come through. And here you can still see some of this dark purple of the wall come through this lovely pink, and that will add a lot of texture to a painting. So trying to not use my paint too heavy, too much impasto. And I want a lot of the base colours to radiate through these broken brush strokes. And let's put some on this side. And let's bring in the addition of my blues now. So using the French ultramarine blue, putting it into the pink that I've just made. So it's created a very sort of very light mauve, a lavendery sort of colour. And I'm still squinting down the importance and the power of seeing less, that old chestnut that less is more, and it really is with painting in this loose manner. If you want to paint in a more free-flowing, expressive or impressionistic way, then one of the keys to it is actually seeing a lot less. Try and see the world in a blur and a fuzz. And by half closing your eyes, you sort of get a little insight into that world. And that's sort of what I'm still painting. So painting through these half closed eyes is allowing me to really have some fun with a range of mark making that I'm doing here. Now the last thing I'd like to do just before I stop and look at my highlights is to get a sense of that sky back. Now I decided not to put it on first because the sky is not a strong feature of this picture. It's just hidden behind the trees at the back. So instead of painting that sky first, I still want that yellow, but I'm just taking a little bit of the blue. I'm going to make it a little bit stronger, so that's the French ultramarine and a hint of white. I'm just going to allow the brush almost just to fill in just a few of these gaps. And let's just take off the heavy. Using the board, I'm just going to take off the weight of that paint so it's not as heavy. There you go. So I can get these lovely broken, scumbled marks. And let's just now bring in a lot more white into that mixture. Again, not quite as heavy. And again, to keep the picture all connected and all talking to each other, I'm going to use this same blue and find it elsewhere in the picture. And this is offering a really lovely cool element to all these pinks. You've got a nice little balance between the warmness of the pink and then the coolness of the blue going in now. Okay, so that's me putting in most of those mid-tones. You've got the lovely range of greens, which were first put on using this slightly bigger brush. We went slightly lighter with those greens, and then with the addition of those pinks, purples, and then finishing off with the blue, I feel like I've mapped out a lot of those mid-tones. So what's left now is to bring it all together with the highlights.